Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Unknown. A line often attributed to the Navy SEALs or Special Forces communities, common in marksmanship and tactical training, because if you rush, you introduce errors, and errors cost time. In government, accuracy looks like process, reviews, coordination, briefing, argument, the boring stuff that makes decisions defensible. But when the incentive is to move first and justify later, the trade-off becomes obvious. Speed can buy immediate results. Legitimacy is what makes decisions durable. Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon, the national security podcast that gives you a competitive advantage, an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines shaping our world, looking for patterns and early warning signs, and asking how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's February 16th, 2026. Let's get to it. Hey, Sue, how are you?
Morning, Eric. I'm great. I'm just off my kind of new body shakedown cruise of a
Main voyage.
main voyage of this version. I don't know, Sue Gordon. I don't even know what version I am.
Not 2.0?
Yeah, no, I think I might be beyond that.
2.169?
Yeah, exactly. But it's really about, I was so excited that I felt well enough and have gotten this far along that I'm like, okay, time for a trip. And I made it like a week and a half and 3 different locations. And I might need to actually accept what my body can do right now. But I did go back to Virginia. The National Security Space Administration was lovely and gave me a Lifetime Achievement Award.
Nice. Congratulations. That's a big deal.
It was, I hate being seen, says a woman who now does a podcast and we put it on YouTube. Yeah. But I love talking about other stuff, hate anyone talking about me. But I will tell you, to be awarded something for space, to have my name associated with Pete Aldridge and Marty Fega and Larry Gershwin and General Lester Lyles is just... It's unbelievable for a girl that started her career doing analysis of Soviet space systems and then got a chance to build some and then lead humans that harvested images from space. I don't know. It's surprising, wonderful, and I was honored. So that was terrific. And I saw a bunch of people I haven't seen in a while, so it was my chance to thank them for all the tolerance of me they've done over the past year. And then I went down to my Duke for the Duke women's basketball reunion and saw a couple games and saw a bunch of people who I had played with, who are my sisters and my besties. Had a chance to, I don't know, same thing with the Space Award, reflect on the people who began it all and then look at the talent that's standing on those shoulders. In the case of the award, I'm the new kid that gets to have benefited from all the work that went before. In basketball at Duke, I'm the old gal who is still kind of buttressing this amazing explosion in abilities that we're seeing now. So just a great kind of, I'm back, not quite, but remembering just all the wonderful things I get to be a part of.
Personally rewarding and invigorating trips to see old friends and also new ones in basketball and keep that connection alive is awesome. And then congratulations again on the award. That is a big deal.
Thanks.
Super proud of you and think it's really cool that they recognized you for that and on that esteemed list. And speaking of esteemed lists of highly accomplished individuals, happy President's Day.
Thanks. Happy to you. I love America.
Yeah. And wanted to ask you, who's on your top 4? Who's on your Mount Rushmore of presidents? Right now, we've got up there George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Teddy Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln.
Wow, that's a really good foundational list, right?
It's hard to try to pull one of those folks off. Maybe the better question is if you could have dinner with any 4 presidents, and that provokes then interesting conversation, right? You've got polarizing figures. It doesn't have to be just the 4 best. Who would you maybe put on that list?
Yeah, and maybe I'm going to merge the two things and not try and parse myself too much, which is my favorite thing to do. Because I was introduced to the Netflix show of Death by Lightning, the James Garfield story.
Yep.
6-month presidency, but if you think about transitions, people who make things happen, whether it happens during their tenure or whether it was the catalyzing moment that then someone else built on, he just seems like an example of just a good person who had a vision, who didn't want the leadership he was thrust into, but he certainly made good use. And by simply being relentless of who he was, he really did that pivot point from a nation of patronage, what then FDR codified with civil service. So one, I think he just seems like a great guy. And two, I just want to hear more and kind of how he got there. So James Garfield would be one. JFK, because
Hmm.
there are just some super interesting things about his presidency. One, just you have to say that he was one of the great modern messengers in terms of knew about communication and inspiration and how you talk to people, whether that is how you inspired the great accomplishment of space that then became really the foundation for so much of what we do technologically. But the other thing about JFK is he was an example of a politician that wasn't ready to be a president, and you could see his growth over his, again, too short tenure from kind of how he was led around by the nose over Bay of Pigs, but then really came into his own with the Cuban Missile Crisis and then turned that into a number of things. So maybe JFK,
Yeah.
because was he a lucky, arrogant guy with great handlers, or was he someone who sometimes when greatness is thrust upon you, you become worthy of the moment that you had? So I think I'll stop at those two. Truman is interesting, another guy who had a moment thrust upon him, but
Hmm.
actually created some. Maybe I have to add Ike in because that moment of World War II is just so remarkable in the choices he made, the responsibility he took, and then what he led the nation kind of afterwards. So those three.
Yeah, Garfield's a good pull. Very
Yeah.
interesting.
How about you?
Yeah, I put Ike in there. Ike is very interesting to me. Also from the Supreme Allied Commander role and
Right.
how he rose through World War II and decisions to be made and Operation Overlord and D-Day. Pretty interesting. And then to serve 2 terms as president to bring the economy and the country out of World War II and into the
Yeah.
next 50 years. Super interesting.
Maybe for another episode, we'll talk about our anti-favorite list. I have a particularly negative view of Richard Nixon. Interestingly enough, not because he didn't do some good things during his tenure, but I was in junior high school. I saw that whole Watergate thing unfold. And to me, while there was certainly corruption before him, it was the first time where we knew it incontrovertibly that at the highest levels, people were playing fast and loose with the American power, and I think I hold him very responsible for a lot of things that happened afterwards. So maybe we'll talk about an anti-list at some point.
And Mount Rushmore was finalized in 1941.
Yeah.
So a couple of the folks we both mentioned were 20th century presidents.
Yeah, so maybe for our audience, it'll spark some conversations around tables on this President's Day because celebrating America is about celebrating our systems and institutions. And I think a talk at dinner tables about the various presidents and kind of reflecting back to my first comment about kind of recognizing the shoulders we stand on might be a fun kind of family tradition so that we don't just say America's great, but we actually talk about the people who have ensured that over the years.
Hmm. Yep. All right. Well, what are we going to talk about today?
The argument we're making today is that speed feels powerful, but legitimacy is what actually lasts. We've kind of alluded to this over every
Hmm.
episode we've had this year. What we're going to try and highlight is that when leaders move fast and fix later, they may win the moment, but they might weaken the system that has to hold afterwards. We do, and you and I talk about this a lot, there's an added complication that not every problem is man-made. We also have the challenge that this is an environment that is moving faster than the systems that we've built to produce legitimacy can keep up with it. So institutions that were designed for deliberation, coordination, and trust are now being asked to operate at the speed of crisis and media and technology, and the mismatch is showing. So it's not just an issue of insufficient leadership. This is a really hard time of how you both meet the moment and you build something that'll last. So I think we're going to talk about this in three parts: what looks like bureaucracy, how authority starts to blur, and how legitimacy, once stretched, is pretty hard to reconstruct.
Yeah, let's get to it. We'll start today with the Supreme Court. We had a hypothesis that cases are being fast-tracked at an increasing rate than they were previously. So pulling it back, two types of cases go before the Supreme Court. There's merits dockets and then the emergency and interim relief dockets. The merits dockets you can think of as the normal path. Their total petitions received by the Supreme Court is between 7,000 and 8,000 per term, and a term lasts a year, October to October. Cases with oral arguments are usually between 70 and 80 in this merits docket. And SCOTUS blog has published average days between a cert grant and oral argument ranging from roughly 100 days to 180 days. So you're thinking 3 to 6 months between they see them. The merits docket has been smaller lately, with only 56 cases decided in the 24-25 term. That's down from 59 cases in the 23 to 24 term. Then we've also got the emergency and interim relief docket. That's the rapid action, stays, injunctions, administrative holds, etc., often with limited briefing and no argument. The court received over 113 emergency matters during the 2024-25 term, up from 44 in 2023-24. The court granted relief in 53% of those substantive applications during the 24-25 term, more than double the 23% grant rate from the previous term. This comes from both sides, people challenging executive orders and from the administration. The Brenham Center and Ballotpedia report that the second Trump administration filed more emergency applications in the first few months, 28, than the Bush, Obama, and Biden administrations combined over 16 years, 27. So what do you conclude of this hypothesis?
That it's a big old goofy world. So what I reacted to when you were going through your data is the mulling time frame that it takes for them to get to hear the cases between 100 and 180 days. That is a really long time in this world, and kind of to the environment point of, wow, that's just more challenges with all the communication with what everyone knows. The access and opportunities just feels like that's an impedance mismatch that in and of itself, notwithstanding anything else, is just a really great indicator of how different the environment versus the process is. It's almost too small a sample size to draw any great political conclusion about good guys, bad guys, who's using what for when. The fact that I think the emergency challenges and more this administration in few months filing more than 4 administrations over 16 years, I think that's an indication of the system showing its own wear and tear, is that there's just more belief that the basis for rulings is not as accepted as it was in the past. In other words, and this is a Sue Gordon theory, that for the longest time, all our norms were based on a shared understanding that was almost pretty tethered to the nation's founding. And these rules were, and the Constitution was viewed almost as sacrosanct because it was so tied to a shared value system, shared norm, and shared vision. And I think what we see now is that the people operating today are not necessarily saying that those norms still apply and those rules still apply. And so now what was sacrosanct is now general guidance that we can challenge. And so I think you're seeing more challenges to the norm. So I think those are just two things that are not necessarily political things, but more environmental things. Listen, the court's authority rests on process and independent and explanation, and that speed is exceptional, not routine, because it says we're going to be really deliberative, and any change and any ruling we make is going to be based on this really strong foundation. And that's really where the courts are. And so when the institution that defines legitimacy for our nation, when it starts doing things not only fast, but it's this without explanation, here's the decision, I'm not going to tell you why. We're not going to issue either great words around the ruling or the dissent. It almost shakes us to our core. What are we now? What is the basis now? And it goes back to a couple episodes when you talked about the importance of explanation before action. While it may be rightly placed as a way to engage the courts in current challenges, I think the way it's being affected with this shadow docket in addition to emergency orders, is really, I think, what is troubling people and is allowing people to say, "Man, we're really losing our tether." Legitimacy is an investment, and healthy systems know when to privilege each, and I think that's actually what is so disquieting, because that question of when you privilege each seems to have become a political question. You're either on my team or you're against my team, where I think it's actually a much more systemic question.
Right to point out that it's too slow. This is 2026. It's very important for the Supreme Court to understand precedent and know what's come before them and understand all the laws and think about all that goes into it. But there's got to be faster ways that they can use tools to condense that time. Precedent is very important. And so they do have to consider all that. And so there is some delay that should be inherent. But I think they also started as more of an arbiter, right? This three system of checks and balances. And back in 1776, the country wasn't sending as many issues before the Supreme Court
Right.
because the executive, I think, was being a lot more judicious, as was the legislative. And I think we're seeing now, instead of the Supreme Court being thought of as an arbiter and, hey, we don't exactly know what to do on this, we aren't sure, let's send it before the Supreme Court and get a ruling and a judgment based on all the things that have come before and considering all the rules of the land and the norms, like you mentioned. Instead, it's more of a probing operation. Let's put it out there, see what we can get from it. And I myself have been guilty of saying, well, just go before the courts and we'll find out if it's legal or not, or they'll make a decision on it. Well, the problem is the backlog and the throughput, and they do have to consider that large volume of information.
Like I said, I think what the disquiet is, it's this issue of explainability that we've talked about. I don't care whether you're fast or slow. If as a leader you want to build trust, and you do, especially in a democracy where you are just a servant of the people. Let's not forget, leaders don't get to just to say, because I wanna, that if you're not explaining, you're going to have a hard time doing it. And right now it just feels like, no, this is a policy we're doing, and I'm not going to take any time to explain whether this is a good thing to go and just go. So that's one. Two, your point about the court as arbiter, it is a really good place to weigh that out. The problem, what we're seeing now is the other two branches of government seem to be willing to either just move so fast to achieve what they perceive is their authority. And then the Congress, well, they won, so they get to. Now you've got the courts as having to be the bulwark, but they operate at a time frame that just isn't going to keep up. So we really need to start spending some time as a nation to say, how do we build systems that can be legitimate and operate in a temporally relevant time frame? Work to do. We might talk about this in a later episode.
I think so. Well, let's move on to the drones. On the night of February 10th, the FAA did something it hasn't done since September 11th, 2001. It shut down the airspace over a major American city, El Paso, Texas, grounding all flights below 18,000 feet. El Paso is actually 22nd nationally ranked by population of over 680,000 people. Yeah, it's a little bigger than I thought. U.S. Customs and Border Protection operationally used a high-energy laser, but the FAA had not yet completed a safety assessment of the risks the new technology could pose to other aircraft. First reported by Reuters, the weapon was AeroVironment's Locust, or Laser Optical Counter UAS System for Tactical Use, a 20-kilowatt counter-drone weapon designed to engage small unmanned aerial systems with precision and minimal collateral damage. In contrast to traditional air defenses, which rely on interceptors or explosive munitions, a laser weapon uses directed energy to heat and structurally fail a target. Sue, did you know that a laser is actually an acronym also?
Yes, but please illuminate us.
Ah, light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. I'd also like to remind everyone of the fifth yet unofficial weapon safety rule: know your target and what lies beyond. But reportedly, FAA officials had warned the Pentagon that if they were not given sufficient time and information to conduct a review of the weapon's use, they would have no choice but to shut down the nearby airspace. FAA Administrator Brian with a Y Bedford did just that, asserting FAA authority over airspace safety when he believed other agencies were creating danger. Defense Secretary Hegseth had authorized the weapon's use by Customs and Border Patrol, but FAA and Pentagon officials had been scheduled to meet February 20th, actually, to review potential impacts and mitigation measures for the test of the laser system. In this case, speed won, legitimacy lost, at least initially. The Pentagon and Customs and Border Patrol wanted to get counter-drone capability operation at the border now. The impulse was, the threat is real, we have the tool, let's get in the hands of the warfighter. Scheduled February 20th safety review existed precisely to build that institutional legitimacy around this technology and institute risk mitigation measures. So, Sue, the counter-drone technology itself may be perfectly good. The FAA review was already on the calendar, and the system for doing it right existed. Sure, our listeners care about the difference between a capability that's ready and a process that's legitimate.
So let's you and me try and stop the current trend of side taking and not everything you can do should you do. And let's
Yeah.
take America's side here for a minute and just talk about this in the context of this episode. So first, technology wasn't the problem, right? It seems by all accounts, technology we need, technology we've been working on, technology that had been tested, technology people knew about. So the real issue here was sequencing. And that is where you start seeing kind of the challenge. FAA did assert its last resort legitimacy tool, right? It was its break glass in terms of emergency. And I'm going to always try to infer good intent because I think FAA is one of those independent institution that says, no, we have public safety. So it did assert that. And as you said, the review existed. Legitimacy was a mere 10 days away. The problem is then once it happened, it's not just that it happened, they actually corrected pretty quickly. Even though it became a brouhaha, they corrected pretty quickly. But the messaging, as it so often does, outran the verification. Again, trust starts going, people start arguing, they're right, they're wrong, we could, we had, it was. And so that became the problem. I will also say we're not talking much about this, and I don't want to go too hard, but we have got to stop this trend of throwing away half of our human talent every time we have an election because we have decided that what used to be political appointees' installed expertise of the bureaucracy used to peacefully coexist, even if there was tension. Now it's like, no, we got to make sure that every person in an institution is on our side. And what happens is then all the baling wire and masking tape that has held some of our processes are lost with some of those people. So I can imagine that a year and a half ago, had this same thing come up, which it very well could have, there might have been some, oh, I know, I just need to call, Jane, or I just need to call Charlie, and we can put this in place. And those human connections, when you start turning over too many people, can't bail you out. So
Yeah.
I think it really is exactly what we're talking about, not a malfeasance situation, but one that just first showed that we are moving really fast. And then second showed that if we think technology is going to be the only adjudicator, it is not. It's still going to be humans. And then third, our systems aren't keeping up.
From the aviation standpoint, I completely get it because although likelihood was probably low, severity is very high. Like, is that laser going to hit Southwest Airlines Flight 123? Probably not. But if it does, and it causes significant
Right.
damage to a critical flight system and a passenger airline goes down because we didn't have controls in place, that's catastrophic.
And if you just don't have the coordination, the systems aren't going to work and the humans don't feel that they can. And this notion that I feel like I'm picking on Pete Hegseth here, it could have been anyone. The SecDef said, no, it's okay. And the FAA, yeah, neat. But I have this other responsibility that I have to affect it. So you kind of have that. I will say, I think we still kind of have a pox on all their houses situation where I don't know that I get to claim that either one is a hero, even though I'm not sure. I think either one is a villain. We just got to do better. Where I lost my mind is when Secretary Duffy threw out again national security as a justification. Well, we had to because it was drug cartels.
It got a little messier, right? Because he posted on social media shortly after the shutdown, crediting the FAA and the Defense Department with acting swiftly to address a cartel drone incursion,
Right.
on X that the threat had been neutralized and there's no danger to commercial travel in the region. But later we find out it wasn't a cartel drone, but targets were mistakenly identified Mylar balloons.
And I get it. That's embarrassing. But we have got to stop this. If I throw out the national security card, which
Yeah.
right now is drug cartels, which is why we're murdering people in the open ocean. We've got to stop throwing it out because that is borrowed legitimacy, right? That's saying, well, we had to because we did. And again, as soon as it's discovered, now the very people that might have been doing something totally legitimate, they look as someone who is now not trusted to deal with these complex situations. So it's like everyone could have understood bureaucratic insufficiency when that was thrown in. People who, again, are prone to want to take sides are like, see, see, see. And that isn't good for the nation. We got to be better on that. So this messaging out running, this needing to look good rather than actually being good. And sometimes, you know what good is? Saying, yeah, we screwed up. Yeah.
Or just wait till you have all the information. We've complained about that with Department of Homeland Security a lot in recent weeks. Just the jumping to conclusions, Matt.
Yeah. And again, I think had that messaging not gone out, yeah, people might have seen it as the system not working or bureaucracy or whatever they wanted to. But in actuality, the system resolved itself pretty quickly. We didn't shut down El Paso for 10 days. It wasn't good that they did it without notification, especially to state and local, because these are actual humans going through an actual physical location. But it did get it right ultimately in the end.
Yeah. Ultimately, a passenger airliner did not go down. There wasn't a loss of life associated
And people
with it.
weren't inconvenienced for 10 days over nothing. So
Yeah, there's still some medevac flights that had to be rerouted to Las Cruces instead of El Paso. An economics professor at UTEP cited $1.5 million lost to the El Paso community in that amount of flights and things that were canceled. So there was some economic impact, but pales in comparison of what could have been if something bad had happened.
we'll try and tie this back in a later episode. It also plays to when the federal government decides what it is or isn't going to exert locally. So FEMA, we're not going to do this anymore. It's your responsibility. Or SAA, we're going to shut down this airport and not tell you. Ultimately, everything comes down to a local issue where the effect is felt. And so really working to buttress the availability of information to localities and their inclusion in national decision making is going to be an important piece for us.
We also wanted to talk about the signal of corporate hushing around ESG
Yes.
initiatives. On February 12, 2026, the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, finalized the rescission of the 2009 endangerment finding, the scientific and legal foundation that enabled federal regulation of greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act, and it simultaneously rolled back federal vehicle greenhouse gas standards. This doesn't erase climate risk. It shifts the legitimacy battle into courtrooms, state houses, and corporate boardrooms where quiet compliance and liability management often matter more than public pledges. It feels like just yesterday, companies were loudly promoting their ESG profiles, bragging in commercials, citing them in their 10K financial disclosures and capital expenditures. In a moment now where Reuters reports that companies are increasingly green hushing, keeping ESG work and internal tracking systems in place while reducing public claims and disclosures because they're getting hit from both directions: consumer employee pressure to act and political legal pressure not to. A couple industries affected by this repeal: automakers and transportation. So the federal tailpipe targets are erased, but companies may face more uncertainty now, not less, because now they're facing potential lawsuits, state standards, and supply chain commitments already underway that could keep pressure on electric vehicle and efficiency plans. Oil and gas, you think big winners here, most likely. The rollback is a political win for them, but it doesn't eliminate market constraints. It's capital discipline, insurance costs, project finance scrutiny, and it's likely intensifies the do it quietly posture. And finally, finance and insurance. Even with Washington stepping back, climate risk doesn't. Insurers and lenders still have physical, price, and litigation risk baked in. One analysis of the rollback disputes the savings narrative and warns of large downstream costs from climate and health impacts. So, is green hushing a signal of maturity or fear?
So, as is my want, I'm going to bounce higher and I'm going to say neither. It's a signal of system failure. We're trying to legislate the top line with no one with the authority or ability to make real change. So you see this whipsaw when first things are over-regulated from the government's perspective without really thinking about how that is going to be instantiated by people who also have the responsibility to do something. And or when that then shifts and says, no, we didn't mean that. Now we don't believe in that. Gosh, we can't say we're doing that. But man, there's a lot that we were doing that was actually important to us in order to the maintenance of what we're doing. In other words, we keep relocating the risk without erasing it, but without the kind of time or structure or authority to do it. It's both. This is really difficult. I sit on corporate boards and this is green hushing. I will say diversity is yet another thing that kind of really got them as part of the overall ESG initiative,
Right.
social, which everyone knows is important. Every company knows that you want access to the best talent where it is. That's why diversity is important. You need different
Yeah.
kinds of thought and people coming in. But there have been aspects of it that have become performative too. And so when the politics changed, the institutions have to appear to be compliant, but their interests are very different over time. So, yes, neither. It's systemic failure. It's just another example. So, where do we assign it? For your next question is going to be, okay, Sue, nice problem identifying.
Yeah. What solution are you suggesting? And as the federal government is maybe stepping back in this area, who's enforcing it? Does it come down to the private sector or states and courts? Because this is real risk that the companies are considering when it comes to environmental, that it impacts their bottom line. So who creates the strongest silent pressure on industry?
I always think the best silent pressure is from the people. They're the ones that feel it and they feel it. And so what matters to actual human and actual localities is always going to be from people who care. Protests are always difficult and unnerving, but in a democracy, I actually like that we seem to be awake now and vibrating with lots of different opinions and not a whole bunch of solutions, but people care. I think muscle has to still come some from the federal government, from regulation to set some boundaries, just because you can't have market forces be the only things that dominate. We know this from a cybersecurity, information quality. There are a lot of things. This is just another example. You have to have some muscle. But the problem is the rational approach to that regulatory muscle. There has to be room allowed for the corporations to say, here's how we're going to achieve this. Because if we start turning industry into instruments of the state, we lose the tension between capitalism and democracy. And so muscle from regulation that is when we know some hard and fast things we need to, and this has been the problem with some of the ESG, was the companies couldn't figure out what the tethering between the action they might take and the outcome that was described in terms of climate could work. And so got to have regulatory muscle. Industry does have to be the ones that I think sets how you have an irrational approach. And then you have to have opportunity for innovation at the local level because they're the ones that are feeling the effect. Discussion of these issues in terms of national interest is the way that you get all the elements of pressure and perspective to work together. The previous administration was too prescriptive without enough rationality in how you tether action to outcome.
Yeah.
And I think the current administration, when it doesn't offer any guidance, is leading to a local option that may or may not achieve the larger systemic effect that we need. We have to get better at a system that allows for both. We have to be more responsible in our use of regulation as the only tool the government has. And industry and humanity have to take more responsibility for preserving the environment that has allowed them to succeed so wildly for so long. It would always be a difficult scientific, technical response.
Sure. Yeah.
But it has been made so much worse because now you're on a side, and so you can't even do rational things, the green hushing, because you don't want to anger whoever has decided this is fundamentally good or bad rather than a necessary challenge that we have to address. I know you didn't think I was going to pull out my soapbox in this episode, and yet I did.
Always prime. I also think it's a good opportunity for a corporation. Yeah, there is the question of blowback and the potential getting on the administration's bad side. But I think there seems to be some momentum among the population and people who recognize this and see the value and see it anecdotally of
Yes.
the climate's changing. That could be an opportunity for a company who really stands up and says,
Totally.
no, I hear what you're saying, but we are benefiting our stakeholders by recognizing these programs and continuing and not just dropping it all right away.
So perfectly said. That's an example of what I think a healthy modern system is. Not no government and not the government overreaching as though it has any idea the best way to achieve industrial effects. So I think it is all opportunity. It is what we're talking about when we say the simplistic systemic response that we seem to have, which is only market forces or only government regulation.
Right.
Neither one of those is working for us. It's not working for us in AI, and it's not working for us here. It's not working for us in terms of human policies. And so this is absolutely an opportunity. And I think you're starting to see companies that are pushing back because they're like, no, we need this to be competitive. There's another great opportunity for this to show is in the emergent nuclear power and commercial nuclear power place is another one where some of the safety is going to, I think, be at risk if the people who now have much more room to produce commercial solutions don't also understand that they carry that aggregate risk and have to put in solutions. So I think this time of incredible disruption is the one we needed to develop entirely new approaches that will work better.
Like a faster Supreme Court docket.
Yeah.
So what do you want folks to take away from this episode? Walk away knowing.
Mostly this episode wasn't about choosing speed or rejecting it. It was about recognizing that we're living in a world that moves faster than the systems that give decisions legitimacy. The Supreme Court, I think, is the perfect example because that has always been kind of our bastion. And even it isn't being able to keep up with it. And when it doesn't, its action or dysfunction is really disquieting. We saw it in El Paso, where the capability outran the coordination, and we saw it in the boardroom where companies are going quiet because they don't want to draw the attention of, unfortunately, what I think has become a retributive government. But they actually see that they have some risks they need to account for with the very same things that are now being lasted allowed. So the path is clear, speed can deliver action, but legitimacy is what lets systems hold under pressure. When the environment accelerates faster than our institutions can adapt, leaders face harder choices, not easier ones. So I'm going to harken back to your cold open, which I just loved, which is slow is smooth, smooth is fast, because in the end, legitimacy is what lasts.
Ooh, nice rhyme.
Yeah, let's keep this of unknown origin, but suggest that it's not just the SEALs that can be clever.
They're just the ones who write all the books about it.
Yeah.
Self-grandizing novels.
So what are we watching?
Board of Peace is meeting this week in Washington, I think on Thursday. So we'll talk about Israel, Gaza, and what all the Board of Peace will do. I'm interested in watching some of Europe's posture and a little bit of things that come out post-Munich Security Conference. Chancellor of Germany had some strong remarks, and then Secretary Rubio as well. And then also Iran. So I think there's a nuclear talks taking place this week in Europe between the U.S. and Iran. And then also we're soon to have 2 carriers in the Middle East, building up firepower.
Yeah. Yeah, those are really good. So I'm just continuing to watch measles and vaccination.
Yeah, we didn't talk about that much. The measles cases are rising, and Dr. Oz came out the other day and said, take the measles vaccine.
Too little, too late.
Yeah.
No, this is a real problem. We have really done it now. We are about to lose standing as having eradicated measles because of this case.
Right.
And we're not helping people because in a minute, the secretary is going to say another insane thing. I'm sorry. I make no bones about this. I think he is our most dangerous leader right now. So I'm watching that. I'm kind of watching the whistleblower with D&I Gabbard, far less for the allegation because I'm just not close enough on the inside. I know too much about how difficult intelligence is to assess. Right. So I'm not really looking at it in terms of the allegation, but more for the process, because when procedures get bypassed or politicized, particularly now, truth becomes harder to establish and trust takes a hit. We seem to be unable to trust anything. And it's things like this, again, not the allegation that happens, but when the process isn't followed, you're like, what are you hiding?
Yeah.
And then I just think to tidy yours, I really like yours a lot. Okay, we're going to move another carrier to the Middle East. Wait, I thought our hemisphere and drug trafficking and Venezuela. I thought those,
Yeah.
and then I hear that we stopped another ship. What are we doing? There's a rub here, and it's why you have strategies and you think about things, is because I don't think I want an administration that is just, yes, they have to deal with all the crises, but just pulling us around, it just feels like we're running into trouble. So what about Venezuela? Is that important or not? Are drugs important or not? I don't know. What's important?
I mean, better than sending the carrier to Greenland, I guess, or Iceland.
I can't. Press on, Eric.
All right. Well, that's what we're watching and how we see it. Thank you for joining us, and no doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, or government, but in its people.
So thank you for joining us. We love being with you. We would love to hear back from you. Any feedback you have, there are ways that you can reach out to us. Go forth, do good, and for goodness sakes, be kind to one another. It does make a difference.